Okay.
Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, I'm delighted to welcome a very prominent author that many of you, if you are in the Christian world, or even some of you that may not be in the Christian world, would more than likely know. Ellen Vaughn, who is a New York Times bestselling author, and she's known for writing many, many great books, becoming Elisabeth Elliot. And today's topic of conversation, actually, we're talking about being Elisabeth Elliot, which is a brand new book. It's the authorized biography. And one of the things that I liked is that you're in Northern Virginia at the moment and you enjoy reading, hiking, drinking coffee with friends, and staring pensively at the ocean, which
Yes, of course.
I am very much the same. I do the exact same thing. It
Yeah.
is so peaceful, so calming.
Yes.
Like you get
Yeah.
in
You
almost
have
like this
to,
trance.
yeah. And you have to have the coffee, though, to do your staring properly.
I don't drink coffee, but
Oh,
I'll have
no.
water instead. So I failed you on that front, Ellen.
All right. Well, we can still be friends, I think.
I'm happy about that, actually. I didn't totally ruin it. But Ellen,
Yeah.
instead of me gushing more and more about who you are and what you've done, I thought I would ask you to explain to my audience who you are, what you do, and why you do it. So, Ellen, please take it away.
Well, and 3 days later, I might finish. No, I was one of those nerdy little kids who loves to read books, right? And the reason I love books was because they take you to places you've never been.
Oh, yeah.
And I love just the magic of books where you could experience these characters, these people who you fall in love with, who have adventures. And so I purposed, particularly after reading C.S. Lewis when I was a
Mm.
young girl, that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. And after many twists and turns, I felt very shocked and gratified that I was able to pursue the vocation that I love. And so I've written about 25 books over the last few decades. And typically I write books about topics that I'm curious about, you know? And so I can become intrigued with things like, oh my goodness, what about the nature of time? And how does that work? And how does a human being who's finite and trapped in time have a relationship with a God who's eternal and outside of time? Things like that. And so, my friend, my agent came to me with the opportunity to do the authorized biography of Elisabeth Elliot. And I was intrigued by her story. Now, a lot of millennials and younger people are like, who is Elisabeth Elliot and why should I care? But for people of my generation, she was sort of this hero because she was a really gutsy missionary in the second half of the 20th century to Ecuador with her husband, Jim Elliot, who she loved deeply. And they had a 10-month-old child. And they were working with the Quechua people, but developed this interest in another indigenous tribal group that basically lived with kind of a Stone Age mentality, naked, deep in the jungle. And these people, now known as the Waodani, had a cycle of violence. If there was any offense, then I kill you, and then you come back and kill me, and then my family kills your family, and this retribution that was exterminating them as a people group.
Mm.
And so Elisabeth and Jim Elliot developed this real burden along with four of their colleague couples. And after a number of peaceful kind of indications, Jim and the other four men went into the Waodani territory, and basically through a misunderstanding, the five young men were all speared to death. And so Elisabeth Elliot, she's 28, she has a young child, and she prays this really unlikely prayer. She says, God, if you want me to do anything about the Waodani, I'm available. And I really, as a Christian, I really like that prayer. God, if you want me to do anything about a certain situation, I'm available. I don't know how you might want to use me, but here I am. And so she prayed that prayer and ended up going and living among this Stone Age tribal people who had slaughtered her husband and friends.
Mm.
And it was almost like a living out of Christianity. She didn't speak their language. She didn't go in and preach to them. She lived among them, like Jesus came to earth and lived among us. And through her example, that embodiment, if you will, of forgiveness, many of the Waodani saw a different way to live. And they determined to stop that cycle of violence and fear that had just enslaved them for generations. And so because of that story, Elisabeth Elliot was a hero and one of the few female Christian leaders in that space in the second half of the 20th century. She wrote 24 books. She spoke all over the world. And so as a young woman, I was impressed by her life. So that's a long answer as to why Elisabeth Elliot and why I've spent the last few years immersed in her life doing volumes 1 and 2, which you held up at the outset, about this remarkable woman.
She is a remarkable woman. And I remember, I think I was in high school and one of my teachers actually gave me a copy of the movie End of the Spear. And I didn't know who it was about at the time, but I watched the movie and I was really awestruck by and captivated actually by the story and what happened. And the first part of the story is obviously Jim going there and the other guys being killed. And that was a very graphic and heart-wrenching moment. And then the second part of it was the tribe accepting almost and welcoming Elisabeth into the tribe. And the fact that she was a woman, and it was just a really, really profound story. And the more, like, when I went through high school and the more I grew up and the more I started to think about her testimony, her way about living life. And she wasn't in my generation, but it was amazing how her testimony has been shared and has spread over the course of many generations. And I think that's a really important thing. Why do you think that it has been spread and has been so powerful for a lot of people, not just your generation, but mine and so many others?
Sure. I think because she dared to go outside the box. She did things that were counterintuitive because of a deeply held belief that these are things that God wanted her to do for the betterment of others. And I think we all respect that kind of gutsy approach to faith and to life, and even to holding one's own life lightly, if you will. And so I think that her life and what she did, which became a very famous story, it was covered enormously in the worldwide press when it happened, but that became kind of the platform that made her into an authentic hero. Because she had done this, I'm going to listen to what she has to say. And then she was an incredibly articulate, brilliant speaker and a great observer of human nature. She was a beautiful writer. And so really the second part of her life was her writing life. And again, the power of books to go out and for people, not just of her own generation, but those who followed, to read the story and then to profit by her insights. And so for me, that's why the project also was intriguing. And then, Jay, I was given all of her, or loaned, I should say, all of her journals, okay? And so she kept, over the decades of her long life, dozens of journals. They start when she's 11 years old, and that journal is written all in pencil, and it says "No boys allowed" on the cover. And then all through like World War II, when she was in college, and then going to Ecuador, and then the loss of her husband, and all of these episodes, like dramatic chapters in a story unfolding in the pages of these journals. And she was a beautiful writer, and it was almost like time travel for me, because I'm reading these pages that are 50 years old, 60 years old, right? I'm reading these pages, and she doesn't know what's going to happen when she's writing those words, just like all of us when we write if we're a journal people and we write. And yet I know what's coming. Yeah. And so that was kind of a surreal sense of her story unfolding in real time, as all of ours do. And then sort of wanting to make her story relatable to other people. And I don't know if you have any impressions of her, but for me, I admired her a lot. I heard her speak different times, met her a few times, and I admired her a lot, but I wasn't sure I liked her a whole lot because she was very formidable and severe and tall, and she just seemed remote. Okay. Not the person you'd want to have, sit by the beach and discuss life. Maybe. And so, but in the pages of the journals, I saw this really relatable flesh and blood human being who I like quite a bit. And so that's the person I tried to bring out in the books.
I think for many of us, like when we look at someone as prominent as Elisabeth, we kind of make them this icon or this hero in our minds. And then when we have the opportunity to go and meet them face to face, we sort of get a little bit shy and we tense up. And I remember when I first started doing interviews, I had no idea what I was doing. And you sort of build your way up to it. And then when I met one of my personal heroes, I froze. I'm like, what's going on here? I'm meant to run the interview. I want to ask this person a bunch of questions, and I just didn't know what to ask. And like, even before this person showed up on the Zoom call, I wasn't meeting them like in person or anything. It was just through Zoom. But I was like, how am I going to get the most out of this person? So it's fascinating how humans think that way, to be honest with you.
Right. And then don't you, I mean, in the course of the interview, then did that person become like a real human being to you and it eased up, like you were able to relate?
Exactly. Like when you see the person for being a person, yes. I think we look at their works and what they've done and we idolize that. And then we attach that to sort of like this hero-like nature of them that makes any sense. And it's just a weird psychological element that we do it. Like we think that we can't do that. So we want to do it. But it's just it's a crazy thing. But I've noticed that we're all human beings at the end of the day. We're all flesh and blood. So let's just all connect. And if you stuff up, you stuff up. It's okay.
Exactly. And I feel like there's something in human nature. It's fascinating when you look at the culture of celebrity. That in every developed nation, we have our celebrities that we hold up and we put on pedestals and we're fascinated by their lives. And I think sadly, sometimes that happens in the Christian space as well, where we have our Christian celebrities and they're all holier than anyone could possibly be. And they never have any struggles or doubts or fears or confusion like we all struggle with. And so Elisabeth Elliot really struggled with that in her own life. Sometimes people would hold her up as this incredibly courageous woman who was impervious to fear or pain or suffering. And that was not the case at all. And I think we're not well served as a Christian. We're not well served when we put spiritual heroes up on pedestals. Because all you have to do is read the Bible and you see that the heroes of the pages of the Bible, the people who Jesus hung out with, his closest friends, were all a wreck. They were flawed human beings. And the beauty is that the grace of God flows over all of our own human inadequacies, and the story goes on. And so I wanted in these biographies, again, to not present Elisabeth as someone who, if only we could aspire to be as courageous as she was. No, but here's someone's story, and there's plenty that we can relate to and glean great things from. That's part of why we read books. But also, we're not less than because we haven't taken that particular life path.
No. It's also interesting how human beings, we're the ones that make other human beings famous. So it's a strange phenomenon in retrospect when you actually think about it. It's like, well, this person actually wouldn't be famous if it wasn't for me. making
Right.
them sort of famous. Like, even though they're doing something in the world of celebrity, let's say, or they're making a
Yeah.
movie, even in the Christian sense, like you got these pastors that are really well known and really famous for what they've said or what they've done.
Mhm.
And really what they're doing is just speaking God's word usually. And so like we're idolizing them for speaking God's word, but it really should be, we should be idolizing God's word more, because
Mhm.
that's fundamental, not the person who said it. They may have said it in a way that has moved us, but I just find it really, really fascinating. So that's why, I mean, even yourself, Ellen, like, have you come across this world of celebrity? How have you managed to navigate it? Because you are really well known.
Well, it's I'm gratified that you think so. I don't tend to feel that way at all. So I think, to go back to what you're saying is, I think social media too, just, like, I mean, makes that whole thing even more complicated. How many likes or retweets or, all just that whole atmosphere can be pretty toxic. And I think that the one of the few advantages of getting older is that I find myself just much more with the sense of, oh Lord, I'm a mess, but I'm your mess. And so sometimes if I have speaking engagements or something, there will be people who kind of maybe put you in a different category. And the first thing I want to do is say, no, we all struggle with the same things, and we're all here to help one another. Really, I think the role of community is so, so important, that we not isolate and think of people as out there, but no, that we're all connected.
Mm.
And there is only one hero who will not disappoint us, and that's Christ himself.
Amen to that. I wanted
Yeah.
to go to a very, I guess, emotional place for you, Ellen. I was a little bit perplexed with this conversation in general, mainly because there's two stories here. There's your story and there's Elisabeth's story. So I'm like, which one do I want to dive into a little bit? I guess both in a way, but to sort of set up the author, as it were, talking
Mhm.
about the person she's writing about, I wanted to ask you something personal. And it's basically, you've put it in the dedication: in memory of and gratitude for Lee Vaughn, March 29th, 1958 to July 20th, 2022, which is not that long ago.
Mhm.
And you've got a Bible verse, Job 1:21, the Lord
Mhm.
gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Are you
Mhm.
able to share what that means to you and why you put it there?
Well, I wasn't sure about putting it there, that dedication, because I didn't want too much of me to leak into the book. But then, on the other hand, what happened, Jay, was when this book has a very poignant kind of emotional centerpiece, which is a period of Elisabeth Elliot's life most people don't know much about. I certainly didn't. And that is the true love of her life, that in middle age, she fell passionately head over heels in love with a man who was very much a kindred spirit to her, named Addison Leach. And
Mm.
they married, and it was the happiest season, I think, of Elisabeth's life. And then again, in the pages of the journal, I'm reading her journal, and Addison has this growth on his lip. Wonder, he needs to go to the doctor. Oh God, please don't let it be cancer. It's cancer. And then this long, horrific journey of this metastasizing cancer and the slow disintegration of this man who she loved, and his death. And so to write that section of the book, as an author, you kind of have to put on the person you're writing about, put on their story. And at the time, I was writing about things I had not experienced. So I wrote that whole section. And literally, as God would have it, within about 48 hours, my own husband, Lee, had to go to the emergency room. And he ended up being diagnosed with this aggressive, malignant, rapacious, inoperable brain tumor. And within just a few weeks of his diagnosis, Lee passed away. And for me, in the midst of writing Elisabeth's story, and then, of course, with that emergency, shoving, the manuscript aside and living my own story, that was such a eerie kind of echo of what had happened to Elisabeth. I felt a couple of things. One was this sense of nothing is wasted. I thought, God, I really didn't want to be part of the same club with Elisabeth, but here we are. And I felt such a strong sense of God's presence. And even in my husband's passing, our 3 grown kids and their spouses were with us. And it was a sweet time, because if Christian faith is true, then Lee is better off now than he has ever been. And we could release him. And I'm very thankful that he is no longer suffering and that he is in the presence of absolute joy. So obviously, I took time away from the manuscript. But when I returned to it, really last fall, I guess, it was with, I think death gives you more of a concentration of the mind. What is important, what is not, what is extraneous. And so at any rate, that life event for me shaped the writing really of the rest of Elisabeth Elliot's story.
The perspective of loss and grief as
Yes.
you're writing Elisabeth's story and you're learning about her loss and her grief, because she lost Jim and then she's losing another love of her life. There's been a lot of loss and a lot of grief. Having been someone reading that and then writing about it, what was the perspective like for you as you're writing it, and then after, when Lee passed away?
Yes. Well, I think one of the themes of Elisabeth's life, and I think one of her greatest contributions, was her view of suffering, because all of us experience loss and suffering in this life. And Elisabeth defined suffering as having something you don't want or wanting something you don't have. And so that really applies to things both large and small, right? And I feel like what I appreciate about Elisabeth is she didn't try to put the mystery of suffering in a box. Like, here's what we all need to do. We need to do point A, point B, point C, and here are all the Bible verses that go with that. And then you're done. You processed it. I think that the Bible, if you look at it, is full of lament. Look at the Psalms, of people who love and trust God, crying out to him in the pains that this life brings. And we can be honest before him. I think that is a big part of Elisabeth's legacy, and something that I would affirm as well in my own losses. I think, too, that she had such a sense of the mystery of God is much bigger than anything a finite human being can figure out. And again, he defies formulas. He defies explanation. Sometimes Christians are like, well, this happened, so God could do this and this and this. And the grieving person is like, I don't care. That may or may not be true, and it is not helpful. But the ability to just stand before the mystery of God and trust him in the face of loss. Is he good or is he not? And to lean into him. I think that's Elisabeth's greatest contribution in the body of her writings, and really in how she lived her life. It was all about the reality of the God that we do not always see.
What do you think is the ultimate purpose from reading all of Elisabeth's story, and even from your own story? What do you believe is the ultimate purpose of pain, suffering, and loss?
Well, that's a huge cosmic question there.
I know.
Yeah. As as a follower of Christ and a person who believes the Bible, I think the purpose of suffering is ultimately to refine us like gold, and also to cause us, ironically enough, to trust God more. And the purpose, really, this sounds hard for someone, some of your listeners perhaps, but the sense of the purpose is the glory of God. You know, the Heidel is, which catechism is it that says that what is the chief purpose of humankind? It is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And I think there is a sense in this glorifying of God, even in the difficulties that happen in this life, inexplicable injustice and betrayal and pain. Look what happened to Jesus Christ himself in his earthly life. We regard all of that, and yet somehow that's going to be swallowed up in the place where my husband is right now, with, I think, suffering is going to work backwards into pure joy.
Which, if I think about my own life and all the things that I've journeyed through, and I'm only 27, so it's crazy to even think that now. But I look at it and I do see that there is still joy in spite of the pain and the suffering.
Right.
We may not like it, but they say that joy is a choice. So they also talk about long suffering. And this idea that, like, you look at Lamentations as well, the Psalms, it's full of it. People crying out to God and asking God to take away the pain and the suffering. But I don't think that is the right sort of response. I mean, we do that naturally because we don't like the pain or the suffering in our life because it hurts. And
yes, we don't like pain.
We don't like it. How many of us like it? Although I put myself through a lot of pain every single morning going for a run, and some people may call me a masochist, but I know that it's good, and we may not like it in the moment, but afterwards we can look forward to the element of, hey, look, I did that. I was able to get through that, and there is incredible moments within the suffering where I go, that was incredible. That was amazing. But it's even better when I get to the other side. And that's what I think the Christian life especially is, one of pain and suffering, but it's also one of incredible amounts of joy. Anyway, I think I'm going off on tangents here.
Well, good tangents, and I think I have a friend who's been a quadriplegic since she was 17. She dove into shallow water and broke her neck. And she's been in a wheelchair for almost 60 years, I think.
It's Johnny
Erickson Tata, who is a dear friend. And she says that, and she knows about suffering because, ironically enough, even though she's a quadriplegic, she has horrific pain. And she has said, and it's just unbelievable, that in that pain she experiences an intimacy and an experience of the love of God that she experiences at no other time. And I just lift my hands in wonder at that. So at any rate, I think that something you said a number of paragraphs ago is true. And that is, I think part of peace in this life is knowing that we don't choose our circumstances. Stuff happens, right? But we do choose how we can respond. And that is the dignity of human freedom and choice. And God can really use our choices in the midst of the terrible things that happen so often.
I wanted to ask you about a chapter 5, Playboy. What is that about?
Well, let's see. I think I titled that chapter making reference to Playboy because I wanted to capture people's attention, right?
Yes.
You don't have Elisabeth Elliot and Playboy kind of in the same space, do you? And she made reference to she had heard that Playboy back in its heyday, we're talking the 1960s, okay, published great articles. And so she had gotten a copy because she wanted to read the articles. She was very intellectually curious about what was cutting edge, or what were the New York Times bestsellers in secular thought, at the time. So she bought Playboy to read the great articles, right? And then she was also very curious, like, who poses in Playboy? So that's your explanation there.
That is funny.
Yeah, it's not the topic of the whole chapter, but it was just a teaser to make you question.
Someone like Elisabeth actually subscribed to Playboy.
No, she didn't subscribe to it. She bought a copy back in the
She bought a copy. That's funny.
Yeah.
Does she still have it?
I don't know. I highly doubt she kept it. All of her papers were loaned to me, and suffice it to say that Playboy was not there. Okay.
There's my curiosity going.
I see where your mind goes. Yeah.
But chapter 3 is Elisabeth Elliot and the psychedelic 60s.
Yeah.
Can you please expand on that? Because again, my level of curiosity is expanding with the psychedelic aspect, and wondering whether she took any psychedelics.
Yes. Well, that would be hard to imagine. But the beginning of this book is in the 1960s, and I love history. And I think the 60s were a fascinating decade. I wrote a book that became a movie, Jesus Revolution, and it's about the 1960s, right? And so I was fascinated because it's a time when American culture had been very kind of square and boxy, and there was just this polarization of young people just wanting to resist authority and to throw off conventions, and they wanted to find themselves through sex, drugs, and rock and roll and Eastern religions. And it was a wild time in America, and there were terrible political assassinations. There was the Vietnam War. There was all this cultural upheaval. And a big part of that, which appears more in Jesus Revolution than it does in Elisabeth Elliot's story, of course, was the drug culture. And LSD was legal in the US till 1965. That's just crazy. But anyway, Elisabeth did not march in the streets or take psychedelic drugs, but she, in some ways, was a rebel during that period. And what she was rebelling against were kind of the religious conventions of, this is how Christians think, this is what they do, this is the tidy answer to complex problems. And she wanted to break out of that mold and really live a faith that was much more connected to real life than she felt the legalistic faith that maybe she grew up with was. So, sorry, no drugs.
Which is probably a good thing, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would think so.
The era that you grew up in, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, kind of reminds me of today, to be honest with you, like with what's going on. Revamp of things at the moment. The world is going a little bit crazy. But Jesus Revolution, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, did you ever expect it to go as, well, because we use the terminology, viral as it has? I mean, it became a movie recently, right?
Yeah. And the movie did really well. And so that was a wonderful thing. It's a great thing to write a book and then have it become a movie that was well done and that enjoyed incredible audience response. And so I wrote Jesus Revolution back in 2018 with Greg Laurie, who is a dear friend, and he experienced, that he was a hippie dude, who did every hallucinogenic he could find, and then actually came to a relationship with Christ through the Jesus Revolution, this incredible awakening among the hippies. And so then I was working on Elisabeth Elliot, kind of not like I'd forgotten about it, but then the movie rights had been bought, and then COVID happened, and then John Irwin, the director, made the film, and it came out in February of 23. And so that has been really fun just to see the response. And I think it struck a chord. That's why it was popular. And people hungry for authentic Christianity, people hungry for some good news, in our very polarized culture today, where you have two sides in North America anyway, or in the US, two sides shouting at one another really loudly. And so I think people were hungry for some sort of spiritual answer, spiritual good news in the midst of our time.
I think we're missing a level of authenticity in today's day and age. I think Elizabeth's story is one that is truly authentic as well, which is why I think it has had so much impact over the generations too. And I think another reason why Jesus Revolution has done so well too is because of their authenticity. It's sort of been stripped away as culture has changed, and you've got these two divides where everything is fake. And humans are very good at determining whether or not something is fake or real. Australians will let you know straight away, and they'll make you pay if it is a lie, as it were. Like, they hold you accountable really well. At least some of them try to, but that's ingrained in the culture. But was Kelsey Grammer part of Jesus Revolution, the movie?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's who it was.
Yes. So Kelsey Grammer, and then oh dear, I'm blanking out on his name. Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus in The Chosen.
Yes.
And then an actor, Joel Courtney. So they have the three sort of male lead parts. And I thought Kelsey Grammer did an amazing job. So anyway, it's interesting too, because a movie is a very different genre than a book, right? Okay. The book has a lot more history in it. It shows what happens to the characters over decades, really. The movie needs to be something that in 2 hours can entertain an audience and leave them with a narrative arc that's emotionally satisfying. And I think John Irwin did a great job at that.
I'm a huge fan of John Irwin's movies, and the ability to turn a book into a movie. Do you think that they're going to be making a movie out of this book?
Yeah, well, different. You mentioned End of the Spear. Now that focuses more on the story of Nate Saint and Steve Saint than it does on Jim Elliot and Elisabeth Elliot. There have been other much interest over the years in making a film about Elizabeth's story. I think it'd be a great story. I think it could really be compelling, as you said, authentic and gutsy, and it would have human interest to it. So, but what do I know? We'll see if anyone out there is moved to take it up.
I'm pretty sure they will. I've got quite a few more questions for you, Ellen, if you don't mind. Maybe I've gone over time. Not sure how long we have together, but obviously I want to be respectful of your time. I did wanted to ask you about the idea of doubt, self-doubt. Have you ever struggled with doubting yourself and whether or not you thought that writing these books or writing Elizabeth's story would, go anywhere or have any impact?
Yeah. Well, I think any writer who tells you that he or she does not struggle with self-doubt is lying. It's funny because here Elizabeth herself, who, as I said, wrote 24 books, and every book she wrote, she's like, oh, I cannot do this. And I feel very much the same way. And my friends are very long suffering because every book I moan about, I'll never get it done. I'm going to just get a job at Starbucks and be a barista. There's no hope for my vocation. So I think that's actually, that self-doubt is a healthy part of the writing life. I mean, people who say, oh, I just love to write, and it's a little voice talks in my ear, and then I write, and then it's done. I don't think are real writers.
Do you ever struggle with writer's block?
Sure. Yeah, but I have a cure for that. Okay, so I have several cures. Do you want to know what they are, or do you want to get to the next question?
Does it involve the staring at the ocean with a coffee?
No, it does not involve that. Okay, but that's a great start. No, it involves, let's see, the spinning chair. Okay, you have to have an office chair that spins. And so when you're having writer's block, you sit in front of your laptop or whatever you're writing on, and you spin in your chair around and around. And when it stops, you just start writing. Okay. And then you have the mustard principle. Okay. And that is when you squeeze mustard onto a hamburger, what comes out first?
I've never done it.
Oh, you're not. Okay. What usually comes out first is the watery stuff. And then the mustard starts to flow. And the same thing happens with writing. Like, you can't wait for the perfect beginning. You spin in your chair, you start, and then maybe a couple pages in, then the mustard starts to flow. Okay. And then you can always go back and cut and edit later. But I think writer's block is something you just have to work through. You can't wait for inspiration. You have to write at the same time every day, if at all possible. Yeah. And if you spin in your chair and then let the watery stuff come out. And the third thing that's really important is a faithful dog by your side. Okay. Because my dog loves everything I write, and he's very encouraging.
What sort of dog have you got?
Well, let's see. At the moment, there's a Woodle, which is a Wheaten Terrier Poodle mix. Hilarious dog. And then a Husky. And the Husky, loves to howl at me.
Like, you're slacking off, Ellen. Come on.
Right. Like, oh, get back to it. Yeah.
I've got a German Shepherd.
Okay. Yeah. So is your German Shepherd supportive of everything you write?
Well, I'm going to say yes, but she all she wants to do is get me out of the office, or really my bedroom, and just play with it. So I take that as her level of, me needing a break. Like, she knows when I need a break away from writing and work. And come on, Jay, let's play. This is what she looks like.
Yeah. Oh, I love German Shepherds. Yeah. So, so she has a role to play.
A big role. But what were some of the challenging aspects for you, Ellen, writing this book?
Well, the usual challenges. I think it's hard to use a lot of original material from which one must work. Okay. So all those journals, and sometimes teeny writing that I had to read with a magnifying glass, and that was very tedious. There was no quick way to digest all of these days and days and days and months and years of someone else's life in order to write about it. And I think the sheer enormity of the amount of material was absolutely overwhelming. Mm-hmm. I've written in the past 2 novels, and novels might seem by comparison much easier because you're making it up. It doesn't have to adhere to truth. I mean, it does in terms of its veracity or its plausibility, but not to the outline of someone else's life. I think biography is difficult for that reason. I must say that Elisabeth's family and Elisabeth Elliot Foundation were so supportive and really kindred spirits, with absolutely no expectations put on me of how the material would be handled or dealt with. And they were also so generous in supplying so much original material that otherwise is not available.
2 final questions for you, Ellen. What does your faith mean to you?
Again, I think the older I get, and particularly in the aftermath of my husband's death, I think there is such an incredible sense of it's true. God's love is real. And my hope is real. And I don't know how anyone could face aging itself and the death of loved ones without a sense of a life beyond this life. because if this is all there is, then that's kind of pitiful. I mean, there's so many great things in this life, but I think you know what I mean. So really, the older I get, I feel like faith takes on a robust sort of simplicity to it, at the same time that the mysteries are as huge as ever.
How are you feeling today?
I feel very robust and joyous. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling amazing because of this conversation.
Okay.
To be honest with you, it's going to make my day. But
Yeah.
I guess the reason why I was asking that question in particular was, I mean, with everything that has gone on in your life and like the overwhelming nature of it, like how is it making you feel? Like there's a sense of gratitude and overwhelming joy, all those wonderful things that just come into play.
Right. And we can't rely too much on our feelings, right? As if that equals reality. But you mentioned gratitude. I think that's one of the radical keys to living well. And I must say, too, the book I'm working on now is taking me to a lot of developing nations. I've recently been in South Africa and Rwanda and India and Nepal. I'm going to Ukraine and Moldova in about a month or so. And those travels and interviewing followers of Christ in those places, that enlivens my own faith and reinforces my own gratitude. So I think having the big picture perspective is really important.
We could spend a little bit longer talking about what you've seen regarding the persecuted church, or even people just that are persecuted in countries versus here in Western culture, like, and the aspects of being able to freely worship Christ here versus people worshiping over there. I mean, the stark reality of that, like, it just makes me at least appreciate the freedom that I have at the moment.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, it's an amazing feeling.
Yeah, I totally, I think if there was a way that every comfortable North American Christian could spend time with brothers and sisters in faith who are in places where they're not free to worship, or conversions are against the law, or so many other privations. I think it's important for us to realize the incredible gifts that we happen to have here, you know?
What do you love the most about yourself and your story?
I've never been asked that. I don't think what I love the most about myself, my goodness. But I think one gift that God has given me that helps me a lot is humor. And so just the ability to be able to see things, I don't know, with a strong sense of the absurd. There's much that is absurd in this life, and that's okay. And I think one of the great gifts of heaven that is not often really understood is the gift of joy and laughter that we'll enjoy there. So I feel a lot of sort of echoes of that in this life, and I'm grateful for that.
Ellen, where can people get a copy of your brand new book?
Yes, well, they all should run out and get 50 copies immediately, and so they can do that on the usual, online venues like Amazon or ChristianBook.com or any other. Just Google it. And they could go to my pitiful website, ellenvaughn.com, and you can order it there as well. I think there's a link to Amazon.
Well, Ellen, I'll make sure everyone knows where to get a copy of the book. Thank you so much for your time, your story, your wisdom, and your advice, and for basically writing this book too. I'm sure it's going to be of immense impact for everyone that actually reads it. So thank you for joining me today on the Storybox podcast.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Jay.